What do you need? Have you ever said that to your kids? I mean, how many times do I have to pause the television, speaking of things that I need? How many times do I have to pause the television for a conversation that should have really only lasted 3 minutes, but now has taken up 2 hours because you keep coming back down? And so that last time you push the button, you pause and you look at them and you say, what do you need? You ever done that? You're like, no, you're a horrible parent. That is well established. That's well established, right? But we ask this question, sometimes frustrated, what do you need? And it's kind of a preacher question. Because each week, I look at the text and I think of you. And I think, what do we need to hear? Here's what I've learned, is oftentimes what you need is what I need. So I've learned to start speaking into those things like, I need this. I need God to speak into my life here. And I've learned to trust that when God is speaking into my life, the things that I need, that we tend to live in these cycles together. But this is a primary question. You're like, well, are you saying you write sermons about me? Sometimes. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, but you are foremost in my mind. You're right there. I can't escape that reality. And I've never written a sermon for a person, but I do write it for us as a people. And so I was thinking about that this morning. What do you need? What do I need? It's this idea that the things that we need sometimes maybe need to be taken away so that we can understand what we really need. Those moments when you need to hear, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Well, I needed that. I needed that reminder, right? We get in these seasons of life. Sometimes we need to hear things like God is in control, like when military dictators like Putin and march on foreign countries and ravage and inflict their vengeance upon them, or maybe even when there's natural disasters. We need to be reminded that God is in control. These are sometimes the things that we need to hear. Sometimes, though, our needs are perceived needs and not actual needs. I learned about those kinds of needs these last couple of weeks, the difference between perceived needs and actual needs. It turns out that I do not need, as much as I hate to admit this, I do not need hot showers. Though my body may have said otherwise when I depleted all of Derby's water supply with the hot shower I took. It turns out that I do not need a remote control in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other in order to complete my day. Though it sure was nice last night. But it's not a need, right? It's a perceived need, not an actual need. Actually, I've been reminded how often I get this wrong. And we do a lot. As a culture, we get it wrong. So I admit that preaching a sermon today is difficult, as I've been asking a whole different series of questions than I normally ask in preparation. The question I usually ask, what do you need to hear, seems small today. I know your needs are real, but I saw people with far less stuff and far more joy. Yeah. And it's hard to ask the question, what do we need? Because it seems like we've got a lot and we shouldn't need much, but man, we're a mopey people, aren't we? So here we are. We come to this passage for today. What does this have to do with this passage? It's actually in the middle of the passage, though I hadn't seen it forever. In fact, I was reading this. I did not realize something. This is Palm Sunday. We've been following the lectionary. Luke, this cycle of the lectionary, the gospel reading, Luke is the favored gospel reading. Next year it'll be a different gospel. The year after that, it'll be a different gospel. But here's what I didn't realize. Luke's gospel, you heard it earlier, never mentions the palms. Did you realize that? I've been telling you it's Palm Sunday, and then I read a passage that said nothing about palms. I didn't know that. I discovered that as I was reading this passage. And so this issue of what do you need, what do I need, was actually something that dominated this passage because what I was expecting to find wasn't there. So maybe today what we need is a new word, a new way of looking at this story. So we come to this passage, and in the midst of our passage on this Palm Sunday, we find something a little startling. You see, if you weren't paying attention, you'll have missed it. I know because I've missed it all along. In fact, I suspect most of us have already missed it. It's an implied question, this question, what do you need? An implied question cloaked in a statement. It's hidden right there in plain sight. The question you see, though, is not what do you need, but rather, what does the Lord need? Or let me say it a bit different. What does God need? And there it is. It's in our passage. It's tucked away in the answer. And the answer is found right there. But the question is behind it all. The Lord, it says in this passage, has need of something. Think of all the things you need. What does God need? A donkey. A foal, the colt of a donkey. There it is. It's amazing. I heard Pastor Jim Somerville, a Southern Baptist preacher, preach this passage, and I was looking for good ideas, honestly. I don't mind someone else's good ideas becoming my good ideas. And he looked through this whole book of Luke, and here's what he discovered. This is not my research, this is his. I say that in case I'm wrong. Here's what he discovered. Throughout, Jesus asked a lot of people, what do you need? What do you want? What can I do for you? But he never said, here's what I need, except in this spot. One place, it appears, not just in Luke, according to Jim Somerville, not just in Luke, but throughout the Gospels, one place, Jesus says, I have need of something. Here it is. He says, I have need of a donkey. Or more specifically, that's been going on for about 3 weeks now. Forgive me, that may happen again. But he says, I have need of a donkey's colt. So pause here for a moment and appreciate the absurdity of this. If I ask any one of you right now what you have need of, you would be able to give me a long list of things. I have need of healing. I have a cousin right now who went through so many rounds of chemo for his leukemia last week. No, I'm sorry, the week before. My timetables are off. And full body radiation to get ready for a bone marrow transplant that he had last Friday. And then all this week, he's followed it up with another round of chemo, all in the hopes of healing. And we say, oh, for the grace of God. Yeah, sometimes that grace is hard fought. Maybe what you need is healing. I know Chad Jewett needs healing. Maybe what you need, or you think you need, is a better job. Boy, we complain a lot, don't we? Maybe what you think you need are stable finances, or a reliable vehicle, or maybe what you need is a nap and a Red Bull. That's my afternoon. Or maybe what you need is to figure out how you're going to survive the next couple of weeks. That's my next couple of weeks. Or maybe what you need right now is for this sermon to end. Well, you don't always get what you need. You see, we would have no problems building a list of things that we need, things that I need. But if I were to turn the question around and ask, what does God need? Would our list be so quickly formed? I don't think so. And I think we'd come up with some answers, and I think they would sound pious and good, but at the end of the day, prove to be hollow and empty. Let me give you an example. There's probably more. I'll just give you 2 examples. I think we would say something like, well, God needs our worship. Well, that sounds good. But really, it seems like God was doing just fine when humanity didn't exist. What does God need? Does he need our worship? I don't think he needs it to be God. Our worship doesn't make God God, and our lack of worship doesn't make God any less God. God is God. I think he loves it. I think we need to worship more than God needs our worship, but it doesn't diminish how much God enjoys our worship, but I don't think he needs it in some kind of existential way, like it threatens his godness. Or maybe we might say something like, well, God needs our obedience. That sounds good. But again, I have to ask, really? I mean, I know God wants it, but not so much for God's sake, but for ours. You see, our obedience isn't for God's sake. Our obedience is for our sake because God knows what's best. And so we obey because if we don't obey, we end up doing things like having to wear clothes and being kicked out of a perfect garden. Right? Please, you still have to wear clothes. So it's not like God's godness depends on our obedience for God's own existence. We obey God because it's good for us and it pleases him when his children do what he commands. It's love. But God doesn't need that. So let's be honest. We could come up with a list of needs of God that seem right, but really don't say much at all at the end of it. And at the end of our list, it would probably never occur to us to add the one thing that God says he does need, a donkey. It's absurd, isn't it? But there it is, right there in the text. Now, to be fair, I may be overinflating this. Like, I'm making more of this than what the text actually means. God's existence does not depend upon Jesus' ride on the back of a donkey. I understand that. But we've got to understand that there is something here that God does need. And we've got to dig just a little bit for it because it's right there. So how all of this works, we read it. Jesus sends a couple of disciples into Bethany to get this donkey in preparation to enter Jerusalem. Now, it sounds a little weird. Like, he sends them in and he says, now, if anyone asks you about stealing a donkey, I mean, it doesn't say that, but let's be honest. You're going to walk into town, and there's going to be a donkey there. Don't worry about it. Just untie it and take it. And if anyone says anything, just do the mind trick. There's no donkey. Jedi mind trick. You have, the Lord has need of a donkey, right? I mean, I don't really think that this was some kind of miraculous Jedi trick that occurred. Really what I think, sounds very simple, and I could be wrong. But what I think is, Scripture has proven Jesus has been to Bethany quite a bit. I think this was a prearranged donkey. He had talked to the guy, and he said, hey, I'm going to be sending a couple of my guys in, and you may see them untying this. They know when you come out asking why they're stealing your donkey, they know what to say. Here's the secret code. The Lord has need of it. Right? So I really kind of think that that's what went on. I could be wrong. Maybe it was a divine Jedi magic trick. I don't know. I don't think it was. But I also don't think that that's the part of the story that is most important. The issue is, why did the Lord have need of a beast to carry him? It's a clue that comes right from the passage that we read earlier out of Zechariah. A passage that had been interpreted by Jews as messianic. In other words, predicting the coming of the king of the Jews. They understood that that passage that we read out of Zechariah was about a coming king. And this is how the king would come, on the back of a donkey. It's a sign. You'll recognize him because he's on the back of a donkey. But why a donkey? Let me read to you this passage again so maybe you can hear it with fresh ears. It says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you, righteous, and having salvation is he, humble, and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." And then the next verse is meant to stand as a contrast. So you have their king, the king of the Jews, coming on a donkey. Now listen, "I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim." Picture in a battle. These are competing kingdoms. Picture in a battle. Some dude on a donkey's colt going up against some dude in a chariot. It's a little ridiculous. And this is part of the point. "I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem." You see, these are juxtaposed against each other. The donkey, the king on a donkey, and the rulers on their war horses. "And the battle bow," he says in Zechariah, "shall be cut off, and he shall speak peace to the nations." Peace. Peace through what? Conquering the king on a war horse, the archer in a war chariot, while riding on a donkey. His rule, this king, his rule shall be from sea to sea, and the river to the ends of the earth. So here's a very startling passage, and this is what Jesus was alluding to. This is what Jesus was enacting when he came into Jerusalem. It's a passage of compare and contrast. God, the creator of all, the ruler of all that is, the very expanse of eternity from galaxy to galaxy and beyond into the infinite. This God, the God who breathes stars and speaks the universe into existence, this God, the God who has never not been, the God who will always be, this God, that God is coming to you humble and mounted on a donkey, a beast that was synonymous with peace and passivity. Imagine how ridiculous it would be to imagine Genghis Khan riding out of Mongolia on the back of a braying beast of burden and into the villages that he conquered with bloody conquest. How ridiculous it would be to see that famous photo of Napoleon with his beast reared back on its hind legs, and to see that beast be a donkey. We would laugh at an image like that. But this is the image we are given. God, the creator of the universe, comes on the back of a donkey and defeats the war horses of the nations. God comes riding into Kyiv in a pinto, and the Russian tanks turn around and the shelling ceases. God comes to African nations ravaged by despot tyrants who carry around their automatic weapons with nothing in his hand but a white flag, and they run away. God comes to the Middle East torn by centuries of conflict, and he enters the city in a geo metro, and suddenly war ceases and enemies flee. It's ridiculous. What does God need? A donkey? Do you see? Part of the point of this passage is that what God needs is to be God. This is what God needs. God needs to be God, and that is not built upon anything that has defined what it means to be human. You see, what it means for us to be human is we've got to come in on war horses and chariots, tanks with power and might. We've got to come in showing how strong we are, peace by superior force. This is the way humanity works. And God says, this is not who I am. And what he says is, I need to be God, and I'm going to prove I'm God by coming in a ridiculous way, on a ridiculous beast. Have you ever been around donkeys? They're ridiculous. They really are. They're ridiculous animals. And not just a donkey, but the colt, the foal of a donkey. You see, God needs to be God, but he's not going to claim his divinity upon any of the structures that have defined what it means to be human. He's going to redefine it. What does God need? God needs a donkey. You see, we have spent so much time beating our chests, demanding that God meet our needs, claiming divine right, divine privilege, and ultimately divine autonomy so that whatever we do, we claim to do in the name of God. But it boils down to this. God will be God because God can be nothing other than God. God does not need to ride in on the back of a stallion in order to be God. A donkey's colt will do just fine. God's humility destroys the vanity of our own chest beating and competing to God of our own life. This is how God comes in. What God needs is to be God. And in order for us to see how truly God is, he needs a simple beast to show that God's smallness is infinitely greater than our greatness. God needs the simple things in order to show us just how much God is. So he takes the small things and he places himself on those small things and in those small places and in those weak spaces and in those broken places and shows himself to be God so that when we stand back, no one can say, well, they did this by their might. They did that by their strength. No, it's God coming in our brokenness, but being very God in the midst of it on the back of a donkey. What does the Lord need? The Lord has need of a donkey. Hear this with joy this morning. What a relief this should be to us. What a lifting of the burden this should be to us. Because part of what this is saying to us is that God has need of you. Do you know how many King James versions of this story would give me jokes to tell? Where King James does not use the word donkey. Oh, it's making my palms itch. God has need of a donkey. Isn't that good news? Right? I traveled with some of you. God has, you're like, oh no, you got that wrong, buddy. They traveled with me. God has need of a donkey. Hear this with joy, because part of what God is saying is that he needs you. God chooses to need you. He needs you. It's the same way a husband and a wife need a child. Dana and I were a family for the 5 years we didn't have children. We didn't need a child to be a family. But we need those kids. We need them. God needs you the same way. God doesn't need you to do what God cannot do. Instead, God needs you to show the world that God is God precisely because you are not. He needs a donkey. God has need of tired and grumpy people to go into Guatemala. Not because we are capable, but precisely because we are not. God has need of broken bodies to declare his goodness so that the world can see that God is God in our weakness. God has need of your weakness and your frailties to declare to the world just how powerful God is. You see, if you've been listening closely, you'll get the message behind the message, which is this: God needs you. not because of what you can do, but because of what you cannot do. God needs a donkey. God still comes riding into the world on the back of a donkey's colt, because the Lord has need of you. Hear this morning with joy. This is how God comes into the world, is through humility and brokenness.